Mr. Simpson has now come back to the courtroom.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
For decades, the OJ Simpson case has haunted America like an unsolved puzzle with missing pieces. Everyone thought they knew the whole story. The white Bronco chase, the trial of the century, the not guilty verdict that split a nation.
Kato Kalin shot to fame 20 years ago during the OJ Simpson murder trial. He was the famous house guest staying at OJ's place. He was also a star witness.
But what if everything we believed was just the surface of something much darker? Recent discoveries have finally cracked open secrets that powerful people spent years hiding. And the truth behind OJ's story is more twisted than anyone imagined.
Women out there who saw Furman recognized him and kind of touted everybody on the defense team and the prosecution about his racial bigotry.
What really happened that night in Brentwood, and why were certain facts buried so deep? Let's dive into the shocking reality that changes everything we thought we knew. The golden boy who had everything. Orenthal James Simpson was a cultural phenomenon, a man who broke barriers and became America's sweetheart. Born in San Francisco in 1947, OJ grew up in the projects, but had dreams bigger than his neighborhood. His mother, Eunice, worked multiple jobs to keep the family afloat, while his father, Jimmy, battled his own demons with alcohol and abandoned the family when OJ was young. The streets could have claimed another kid, but OJ had something special. He could run like the wind was pushing him forward. At Galileo High School, he discovered football was his ticket out of poverty. College scouts noticed the skinny kid who could outrun anyone on the field, and soon the University of Southern California came calling. At USC, OJ became a legend. He not only played football, he dominated it. In 1968, he won the Heisman Trophy, college football's highest honor. But more than his athletic ability, OJ had charm. He could make anyone smile, tell jokes that had people laughing until their sides hurt, and carry himself with confidence that made others want to be around him. The Buffalo Bills drafted him in 1969, and professional football had never seen anything like OJ Simpson. He became the first player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a record that seemed impossible. Fans respected and loved him. He transcended racial barriers in a way few athletes had before. White families invited him into their living rooms through television commercials, and black communities saw him as proof that anything was possible. When OJ's football career started winding down, he didn't fade away like most retired athletes. Instead, he reinvented himself as an actor and spokesperson. Hollywood welcomed him with open arms, casting him in movies like The Towering Inferno and the Naked Gun comedy series. His natural charisma translated perfectly to the screen, and audiences couldn't get enough of his infectious personality. The real money, though, came from corporate endorsements. Hertz Rent-A-Car made OJ the face of their company with commercials showing him sprinting through airports. The tagline, "Go OJ Go," became part of American culture. He was selling the American dream, success, speed, and getting ahead in life. OJ lived like a king. He bought a massive mansion in Brentwood, one of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house had everything: a pool, tennis court, and enough space to entertain the rich and famous. He threw parties that brought together movie stars, athletes, and business moguls. Everyone wanted to be OJ's friend because being around him meant being around success. His first marriage to Marguerite Whitley had given him 3 children, but it couldn't survive the pressures of fame and OJ's growing ego. The divorce was messy, but OJ's image remained spotless. The media portrayed him as a devoted father who just grew apart from his wife, a common story in Hollywood. In 1977, OJ met Nicole Brown at a nightclub called The Daisy. She was just 18 years old, a stunning blonde waitress from California with dreams of her own. OJ was 30, famous, wealthy, and married. The age gap and his marital status should have been red flags, but Nicole was swept away by his charm and the glamorous world he represented. Their relationship started as an affair, but quickly became something more intense. OJ pursued Nicole with the same determination he had shown on the football field. He showered her with expensive gifts, took her on luxury vacations, and promised her a life most people could only dream about. When his divorce from Marguerite was finalized, Nicole became his full-time girlfriend. For several years, they seemed like the perfect couple. Nicole moved into OJ's Brentwood mansion, and they became fixtures at Hollywood parties and sporting events. She gave birth to their daughter Sydney in 1985, followed by their son Justin in 1988. OJ appeared to be a loving father and devoted partner, at least in public. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. Friends and family members later revealed that OJ had a controlling side that grew worse over time. He wanted to know where Nicole was every minute of the day. He would show up unexpectedly at places where she was spending time with friends. What started as protective behavior gradually became a suffocating obsession. The couple married in 1985 in a lavish ceremony that made headlines across the country. Nicole looked radiant in her wedding dress, and OJ seemed like the happiest man alive. But marriage didn't cure his jealousy or his need to control every aspect of Nicole's life. The fairy tale marriage would soon reveal its dark underbelly, leading to incidents that should have been warning signs. Behind closed doors, a pattern of violence. The first signs of trouble came early in their marriage, but they were hidden from public view. Nicole began confiding in close friends about OJ's explosive temper and his physical aggression. What many people saw as passionate love was actually the beginning of an abusive relationship that would escalate over years. In 1989, the violence became public when police responded to a domestic disturbance call at the Simpson home. They found Nicole hiding in the bushes, wearing only a bra and sweatpants, with a black eye and bruises on her face and neck. She told officers that OJ had slapped, kicked, and punched her during an argument. The police took photos of her injuries and filed a report, but OJ's lawyers managed to minimize the incident. OJ pleaded no contest to spousal abuse charges and received only probation, community service, and a small fine. The media largely ignored the story, and OJ's public image remained intact. Behind the scenes, though, Nicole was living in fear. She began documenting OJ's abuse, taking photos of her injuries and writing in a diary about his threats. Friends noticed changes in Nicole's behavior. She became more withdrawn and seemed nervous when OJ was around. She would make excuses for bruises or injuries, claiming she had fallen or bumped into something. The confident, bubbly woman who had once been the life of every party was slowly being destroyed by the man who claimed to love her. The abuse wasn't just physical. OJ used his wealth and influence to isolate Nicole from her friends and family. He would embarrass her in public, criticize her appearance, and make her feel worthless. He tracked her movements and accused her of cheating whenever she spent time away from him. The psychological manipulation was just as damaging as the physical violence. By 1992, Nicole had reached her breaking point. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but privately told friends that she feared for her life if she stayed married to OJ. The divorce proceedings were contentious, with fights over money, property, and custody of their 2 children. OJ didn't handle rejection well. He had always been in control, always gotten what he wanted, and Nicole's decision to leave him shattered his carefully constructed world. Friends noticed that he became increasingly erratic, and obsessed with winning her back. He would show up at her new condo unannounced, send flowers with threatening notes, and follow her when she went out with friends. Nicole tried to rebuild her life as a single mother. She rented a condo in Brentwood, not far from OJ's mansion, to make it easier for the children to spend time with their father. She started dating other men, which drove OJ into jealous rages. He couldn't accept that Nicole had moved on and was living her life without him. The stalking behavior escalated. OJ would park outside Nicole's condo for hours, watching who came and went. He broke into her home when she wasn't there, going through her personal belongings and leaving subtle signs that he had been inside. He hired private investigators to follow her and report back on her activities. Nicole documented everything. She kept a safe deposit box filled with photos of her injuries, threatening letters from OJ, and a diary detailing his stalking behavior. She told several friends that if anything happened to her, they should look at OJ first. She even called a women's shelter, seeking advice on how to protect herself from an abusive ex-husband. The spring of 1994 was particularly difficult for Nicole. OJ's behavior had become more unpredictable and frightening. He would alternate between trying to charm his way back into her life and making veiled threats about what would happen if she didn't return to him. Nicole confided in her sister Denise that she believed OJ was capable of killing her. On several occasions, Nicole called the police about OJ's harassment, but the officers who responded seemed more interested in getting OJ's autograph than protecting her. His celebrity status made him seem untouchable, and Nicole felt increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The relationship between OJ and Nicole had brief moments of reconciliation, usually triggered by events involving their children. They would attend school functions together or have family dinners, giving OJ hope that they might reunite. But these moments only made his rage worse when Nicole would inevitably pull away again. Nicole started making plans to move away from Los Angeles with the children. She looked at houses in other states and talked to lawyers about relocating despite the custody agreement. Friends believed she was preparing to disappear completely because she knew it was the only way to stay safe. In the weeks leading up to her death, Nicole seemed particularly frightened. She installed a new security system in her condo and asked friends to check on her regularly. She told her housekeeper that she was afraid OJ was going to kill her and that no one would believe it wasn't an accident. On June 12, 1994, all of Nicole's worst fears would come true in a way that shocked the world. The night that changed everything. The evening of June 12, 1994, started like many others for Nicole Brown Simpson. She had dinner with her family at a restaurant called Mezzaluna, celebrating her daughter Sydney's dance recital. OJ was supposed to attend the recital but didn't show up, which wasn't unusual given their strained relationship. After dinner, Nicole's mother realized she had left her glasses at the restaurant. Nicole called Mezzaluna, and a waiter named Ronald Goldman offered to drop them off at her condo after his shift ended. Ron was 25 years old, an aspiring actor who worked as a waiter while pursuing his dreams. He barely knew Nicole, but was doing a favor for a customer. What happened next would become one of the most debated and analyzed crimes in American history. Sometime between 10:15 and 10:40 p.m., Nicole and Ron were brutally killed outside Nicole's condo. The scene was horrific. Both victims had been stabbed multiple times with what appeared to be a long, sharp knife. Nicole's injuries were particularly savage. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. The violence was personal, filled with rage and hatred. Ron appeared to have fought for his life, with defensive wounds on his hands and arms, but he was no match for his attacker. The bodies were discovered the next morning by Nicole's dog, a white Akita named Kato, who was barking and covered in blood. Neighbors found the gruesome scene and called police. The investigation that followed would expose secrets, lies, and a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the justice system. From the moment police arrived at the crime scene, the investigation was compromised. The Brentwood location meant this was a high-profile case that would attract media attention and political pressure. Decisions made in those first crucial hours would haunt the case for years to come. Detective Mark Fuhrman was among the first officers on the scene, and his actions immediately raised questions. Fuhrman had a reputation for racism and had been involved in previous controversies, but he was allowed to take a leading role in the investigation. He claimed to have found a bloody glove at OJ's mansion that matched one found at the crime scene. But the circumstances of that discovery were suspicious. The police work was sloppy from the start. Evidence was contaminated, crime scene photos were inadequate, and crucial forensic tests were delayed or botched. The blood evidence that should have been the prosecution's strongest asset became controversial because of improper handling and storage. More troubling were the items that disappeared or were never properly investigated. Witnesses reported seeing suspicious vehicles in the area around the time of the killing, but these leads were never fully pursued. Security cameras from nearby businesses that might have captured crucial footage were either not collected or mysteriously malfunctioned. Several people who claimed to have information about the case died under mysterious circumstances or suddenly became unavailable to testify. A harmful substance dealer who said he had information about alternative suspects was found dead of an apparent overdose. A witness who claimed to have seen OJ in a different location during the time of the killing left town and was never located. The trial that followed would become a spectacle that distracted from the real evidence and allowed the truth to remain buried. The trial of the century or the cover-up of the century? The OJ Simpson trial began on January 24, 1995, and quickly became a media circus unlike anything America had ever seen. Television networks provided gavel-to-gavel coverage, and the case divided the country along racial lines. But while everyone was focused on the courtroom drama, the real story was happening behind the scenes. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, seemed confident they had an airtight case. The evidence appeared overwhelming: OJ's blood at the crime scene, the victim's blood in his car and home, a history of domestic violence, and no solid alibi for the time of the killing. But their case began falling apart almost immediately. The defense team, dubbed the Dream Team, included some of the most famous lawyers in America: Johnny Cochran, Alan Dershowitz, F. Lee Bailey, and Robert Shapiro. They were putting the entire justice system on trial. They exposed the racism of Detective Fuhrman, questioned the integrity of the evidence, and suggested that OJ was being framed. But recent investigations suggest the defense team knew more than they let on. Sources close to the case now claim that certain evidence was suppressed not just by the police, but by powerful people who had their own reasons for wanting the truth buried. OJ's connections to wealthy businessmen, politicians, and even organized crime figures created a web of interests that all benefited from his acquittal. The famous glove demonstration, where OJ appeared unable to fit the bloody glove over his hand, was later revealed to be choreographed. The defense knew the gloves had shrunk from being soaked in blood, and OJ had stopped taking his arthritis medication, causing his hands to swell. The moment that seemed to prove his innocence was actually a carefully planned theater. The not guilty verdict on October 3, 1995, was celebrated by many as proof that the justice system worked, even for black defendants. Others saw it as a miscarriage of justice that allowed a guilty man to walk free. But both sides were missing the bigger picture. The trial had been a distraction from the real conspiracy. In the years following the criminal trial, new evidence began to surface that painted a very different picture of what happened that night. The civil trial in 1997, where OJ was found liable for the wrongful deaths of both victims, revealed information that had been suppressed during the criminal trial. Private investigators hired by the victims' families uncovered witness statements that had never been turned over to prosecutors. They found surveillance footage that mysteriously disappeared from police evidence rooms. They interviewed people who had been too frightened to come forward during the original investigation. One of the most significant discoveries was a recording made by Nicole just weeks before her death. In it, she described specific threats OJ had made and mentioned that he had connections to people who could make problems disappear. She also referenced payments he had been making to unknown individuals and suggested that his financial troubles were deeper than anyone knew. The recording had been given to police during the original investigation, but was never entered into evidence. When investigators tried to locate it years later, they were told it had been accidentally destroyed. However, a copy surfaced in 2018 when Nicole's sister found it among personal items that had been returned to the family. In recent years, several retired police officers and government officials have come forward with explosive allegations about the OJ Simpson case. Their testimonies paint a picture of a massive conspiracy involving corrupt cops, dirty politicians, and powerful business interests who all had reasons to protect OJ. Former LAPD Detective Russell Poole spent years investigating corruption within the department before his death in 2015. Before he died, Poole told close associates that the Simpson case was connected to a network of dirty cops who were being paid to protect certain high-profile individuals. He claimed that evidence was deliberately destroyed and witnesses were intimidated to keep quiet. A retired FBI agent, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that federal authorities had been monitoring OJ's activities for months before the killing as part of an investigation into money laundering and illegal gambling operations. The agent claimed that OJ was not the primary target, but was connected to people who were, and his arrest would have exposed a much larger criminal network. Most disturbing was the testimony of a former coroner's assistant, who claimed that Nicole's body showed signs of torture that were never mentioned in official reports. According to this source, Nicole had been held captive and tortured before being killed, suggesting the death was not a crime of passion, but a planned execution designed to send a message. The assistant claimed that photos of these injuries were taken but later disappeared from evidence files. When family members requested copies of all crime scene photos years later, they were told that some had been lost due to a computer malfunction. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source, someone who claimed to have been present during the planning of the killing. The insider's account. In 2019, a man identifying himself only as David M. came forward with the most detailed account yet of what really happened on June 12, 1994. David claimed to have been involved in illegal activities with OJ and to have been present during conversations where Nicole's death was planned. According to David's account, OJ had accumulated massive gambling debts with dangerous people who were tired of waiting for payment. His financial situation was much worse than the public knew, and he had borrowed money from loan sharks connected to organized crime. When he couldn't pay, they threatened to hurt his children unless he found another way to settle the debt. David claimed that Nicole had discovered OJ's illegal activities and was threatening to expose them as part of their custody battle. She had evidence of money laundering operations and connections to known criminals that could have destroyed OJ's reputation and sent him to prison. The plan, according to David, was for OJ to be out of town during the crime, creating an alibi while professional killers did the work. But something went wrong with the timing, and OJ ended up being in Los Angeles when the crime occurred. This forced him to participate directly, which explained the personal nature of the violence and the evidence that linked him to the scene. David claimed that Ron Goldman was never supposed to be there, and his presence complicated everything. The killers had to eliminate him as a witness, but his unexpected involvement meant the crime took longer and left more evidence than planned. According to multiple sources who have emerged in recent years, the cover-up began within hours of the crime being discovered. Phone calls were made to powerful people who had their own reasons for protecting OJ, and a plan was put in motion to ensure he would never be convicted. The first step was compromising the crime scene investigation. Key evidence was either destroyed or contaminated to make it inadmissible in court. Detective Fuhrman, despite his racist reputation, was kept on the case because his credibility could be easily attacked, casting doubt on any evidence he found. Witnesses who might have provided damaging testimony were either bought off or intimidated into silence. Several people who claimed to have seen OJ near the crime scene around the time of the crime suddenly changed their stories or became unavailable to testify. The media manipulation was just as important as controlling the evidence. Stories were planted that portrayed OJ as a victim of racism rather than a suspect in a double crime. The focus was shifted to the incompetence of the police and the unfairness of the justice system, distracting from the evidence of his guilt. Even the defense team may not have known the full extent of the conspiracy. They believed they were simply defending an innocent client, but they were actually part of a larger plan orchestrated by people with much more at stake than OJ's freedom. The financial resources behind the cover-up were enormous. Private investigators were hired to follow journalists and prosecutors. Experts were paid to provide testimony that contradicted the physical evidence. Technology was used to create alternative scenarios that cast doubt on OJ's guilt. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the cover-up was what happened to people who got too close to the truth. The mysterious deaths and disappearances. Over the years following the OJ Simpson trial, an unusually high number of people connected to the case died under suspicious circumstances or simply vanished. While some of these deaths could be coincidental, the pattern suggests that someone was systematically eliminating potential threats to the cover-up. Michael Nigg, a waiter at Mezzaluna restaurant where Ron Goldman worked, was shot and killed during an apparent robbery in 1995. However, nothing was stolen from him, and witnesses said the killer seemed to be looking for something specific. Nigg had told friends that he knew more about the night of the crime than he had told police. Brett Cantor, a nightclub owner who knew both OJ and Nicole, was found stabbed to death in his home in 1993, a year before the crime. The crime scene was similar to the death of Nicole and Ron, but police never investigated a possible connection. Cantor had been trying to distance himself from certain clients who were involved in illegal activities. Kasimir Sucharski, another restaurant owner who knew OJ, was executed along with two friends in 1997. The crime appeared to be professional hits rather than random crimes. Sucharski had been questioned by investigators about OJ's activities in the months before the crime and had seemed nervous about what he might be asked to testify about. Several potential witnesses simply disappeared without a trace. A limousine driver, who claimed to have seen OJ at a location different from where he said he was during the crime, left Los Angeles and was never found. A woman who worked at a gas station near the crime scene and said she saw suspicious activity that night moved out of state and changed her identity. Even some law enforcement officials who worked on the case died under questionable circumstances. A forensic expert who had concerns about evidence tampering died in a car accident that investigators later said showed signs of being staged. A police detective who was preparing to write a book about corruption in the case died of an apparent heart attack, despite having no history of heart problems. In 2020, a team of independent investigators gained access to physical evidence that had been held by the Los Angeles Police Department. Using new techniques, they were able to extract DNA profiles that had been missed during the original investigation. The results were shocking. Genetic material from at least 3 different people was found at the crime scene, including DNA that didn't match OJ, Nicole, or Ron. The most significant discovery was a partial fingerprint found on the infamous glove that hadn't been detectable with 1990s technology. The print didn't belong to any of the known suspects or victims, but it matched someone in the FBI's criminal database, a professional killer with ties to organized crime who had been suspected in several other high-profile crimes. Digital analysis of crime scene photos revealed details that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored during the original investigation. Enhanced images showed evidence of multiple attackers and suggested that the death had been staged to look like a crime of passion when they were actually carefully planned executions. Phone records that had been sealed for decades were finally released through Freedom of Information Act requests. They showed a pattern of calls between OJ and known criminals in the weeks leading up to the crime, as well as communications between these individuals and corrupt law enforcement officials. Financial records revealed the true extent of OJ's debts and his connections to money laundering operations. Bank documents showed large cash deposits and withdrawals that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income, as well as payments to offshore accounts controlled by organized crime figures. The OJ Simpson case that captivated America for decades turns out to be even darker and more complex than anyone imagined. What seemed like a simple story of domestic violence and celebrity justice was actually a carefully orchestrated cover-up involving organized crime, corrupt officials, and powerful business interests. Now that we know the truth, the question becomes, how many other cases have been compromised by similar conspiracies, and what other secrets are still being hidden from us? Share your thoughts about this shocking revelation in the comments below.